Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Southern Oregon Climate Action Now May monthly program, Climate Justice 101. I'll be introducing Virginia in just a moment, but first, some Zoom tips. Please mute yourself, as Kathy just encouraged you to do, and stay muted during the program. For questions, we are going to use chat. Please open chat at the bottom of your screen, and please type all your questions into the chat box. Press return after typing, which will submit the question. And when we get to the question and answer period, Kathy will read the questions to our speakers. For screen options, if you want to go to the upper right corner and select view, you can select the side-by-side speaker view or the side-by-side gallery view when you get the Hollywood Squares appearance. As you have probably gathered already, this presentation is being recorded. We would like to do our customary traditional acknowledgement. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land most of us are on today, the Takelma, Shasta, Klamath, and Modoc, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. The meeting format this evening will be the usual one. We start with the presentation. We will then have a brief Q&A. Kathy will read the questions, as I mentioned, and then Kathy will come back for the last few minutes and go through a summary of what SOCAN and other groups engaged in climate activity in the region are doing. The links that are mentioned during the course of the program will be available at the socan.eco/action page. Under individual action, select Climate Justice 101. And now it's a great pleasure for me to introduce Virginia Camberos, who is the Regional Director, as you can see, for Rogue Valley Unite Oregon. Virginia, bienvenida.
Gracias, Alan and Kathy. Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Virginia Camberos. I am the Regional Director for Unite Oregon here in Southern Oregon, which is our Rogue Valley chapter. We have within our organization 4 chapters in Multnomah, Clackamas, Washington, and Jackson. And we're very happy to be here today. I think that is very important what we're doing. And especially because, you know, the voices that are not heard are going to be in the space if they can get their laptops going. But thank you once again. One of the things that I wanted to share with you all very quickly is that we are very, very thrilled to have our partners, you know, which is SOCAN, Southern Oregon Climate Action Now, and with the NWJP, which is our Northwest Workers Justice Project collaboration that we had for many, many years. And we're looking forward to sharing some good info with you today. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Rodrigo Narbona here tonight to share the Climate Justice 101 with us presentation. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me, you know, taking the time. Just need 1 second to get the screen sharing going. And then if I can get some thumbs up if you see my screen or something. Excellent, thank you. So my name's Rodrigo Narbona. I'm with the Northwest Workers Justice Project. We support the efforts of low-wage immigrant and contingent workers to protect their workplace dignity and improve their wages and working conditions. We offer sort of high-quality legal assistance to workers and their organizations, support workers' efforts to organizing, educate workers, their leaders, and the public about workplace rights, advocate at the state level for better employment laws, and promote greater access to low-cost employment legal assistance for low-income workers. And then today, I just wanted to talk about the idea that there can be no environmental justice without social justice. And then again, sort of as a reminder, if you got a question, just sort of drop them in the chat, and then we'll get to them at the end. But anyway, so I think there is this growing recognition that is sort of no coincidence that employers and industries that seek to maximize profits tend to disregard environmental safeguards and worker rights at the same time, sort of go hand in hand. So that is to say, climate change is not a concern only for environmentalists. Like rising temperatures, for example, are a workplace safety issue. And although it's entire working class that is or will be affected by climate change, it is farm workers, letter carriers, construction workers, sanitation workers, and other workers who can't sort of escape to an air-conditioned room, who are sort of at the front line of the environmental crisis. So I want to focus on sort of their experiences. It won't be super detailed given like sort of time constraints, but you sort of paint the picture, and then we can fill it in when we get to questions. Sorry, right. So another reason to think sort of the climate change is a social issue is that because supply chains are vulnerable and workers in agriculture, health and construction are sort of in increasingly precarious situations, which are aggravated by climate impacts. So like flooding, droughts, extreme weather events sort of push workers to migrate, and often into low-wage jobs under dangerous conditions. So I think, for example, in Southern Oregon, when the fires were happening, that prompted a lot of workers who lost their homes and perhaps traditionally worked other jobs into the sort of booming, unregulated cannabis industry. This has been on the news, and where sort of labor abuses are the norm. Moreover, workers in like highly polluting industries sort of face the dual impacts of occupational health and safety hazards and environmental degradation, both of which put their families and their communities at risk. And sort of to make things worse, the climate crisis sort of exacerbates inequality, with less privileged groups sort of bearing a disproportionate burden. So marginalized workers and communities tend to suffer more from the consequences of the climate crisis. There will be the sectors that will be like the hardest hit, for example, are the ones that currently provide most of the sort of low skill jobs. The people who are well off are sort of in a worse position to cope with the impacts of the climate crisis. And again, sort of it's all more unfair because privileged groups sort of contribute and emit the least greenhouse gases, yet sort of shoulder this like heavier burdens. So in the rest of the time, I'm just gonna again sort of just talk about the experiences of workers in sort of different fields. But the sort of idea that I again want to highlight is that sort of building a healthy and vibrant community where we work and live requires bringing community and labor together, and sort of rejecting this narrative that pit workers against communities or like environmentalists against workers. So I wanted to start with farm workers and just sort of some common trends and statistics about farm work in Oregon. And so although farm workers are recognized as essential, so in Oregon, I think agriculture makes up 13% of the state's gross product, which is like 5 billion in production and like 2.57 billion in exports. And obviously none of that would be possible without the farm workers' labor. So even though they're essential, they continue to live through long existing layers of inequality. So for example, there are all these historical farm workers exceptions in the National Labor Relations Act and the Fair Labor Standards Act, which keep them from collective bargaining and receiving overtime pay for work over 40 hours, with the effect of suppressing wages and just weakening overall worker protections. Although worth highlighting that in Oregon, recently passed the farm worker overtime, which is gonna phase in at the beginning of next year. So agricultural workers will be able to earn overtime after 55 hours of work, and then 2 years after that, they'll drop the threshold to 48. And then after that, they'll drop it again to 40. So it catches up with the sort of rest of the other industries. So farm workers tend to receive lower wages. They work in harsh conditions and experience wage theft or retaliation as a result of employment discrimination. Farm workers are some of the lowest paid workers in Oregon, with a median income of $28,000 a year. And again, the overtime bill that I just sort of mentioned, like, would extend overtime pay to about just shy of like 90,000 farm workers in Oregon. Farm workers were also excluded from many of the government benefits during the pandemic, such as unemployment insurance and stimulus checks. And sort of here again, sort of painting with a broad brush strokes. Farm workers are employed in a broad range of activities, including jobs in crop production, processing of crops, nurseries, greenhouses, reforestation efforts, and specialty forest product gathering. The work is often dangerous. Farm workers work through extreme heat, the wildfires, ice storms, the pandemic, all to keep Oregon families fed. According to the Center of Disease Control and Prevention, agriculture sort of ranks among the most hazardous industries with a high risk of fatal and non-fatal occupational injuries. Dangers include pesticide exposure, extreme weather again, dangerous road conditions to and from work, the various stressors that come with sort of immigration. And then as a sort of stat, since October 2015, there's been at least 27 farm worker deaths for work-related incidents, and 2 of those kill multiple workers. I can give sites to all these things later. I'll put them as a sort of suggested reading. Another one of the sort of things that they're normally dealing with is lack of access to drinking water or safe living arrangements. The extreme heat, for example, and the sort of lagging worker protections were responsible for the death of a worker last year that died from heat just outside St. Paul, like during the record-breaking heat wave. It's probably on the news. I think you can sort of divide farm workers into like 3 broad groups. There might be some overlap, but I think it helps to think about the groups because they have sort of different needs. There's like permanent farm workers whose income derives from constant year-round agricultural work, as compared to seasonal farm workers who they're primarily employed in a seasonal basis, but they don't have like a year-round salary or sort of constant year-round wage, which differ from sort of migrant farm workers, which are just a subset of seasonal farm workers, but they're workers who are required to sort of stay overnight away from their homes. They're like, traveling to distant places. So farm workers are often transient, they move from one place to another. A lot of the time they don't speak English, and because they're transient, have little contact with the community, which makes sort of keeping track of them, or even trying to figure out what's going on sometimes difficult. And then sort of their restricted social and political rights, and ultimately the risk of deportation offers serve to sort of further marginalize and compound the vulnerability of these workers, as well as sort of increasing their willingness to accept precarious working conditions. Sort of related to the immigration piece there is that there's like this, what's in essence is like a legal status-based penalty. So like when studies look at how much workers are paid, there's like huge differences between US workers, foreign workers that have status, and then undocumented workers, even though they're doing the same kind of work. And then some other sort of stats I think they're maybe good to keep in mind is that Oregon is among the 8 states with the largest migrant farm worker populations. The Oregon Health Authority estimates that 174,000 migrant and seasonal farm workers and their family members support agriculture and put food on our tables. Again, more than a third of the workforce is undocumented. And their sort of varied immigration statuses excludes them from accessing things like, the coronavirus aid and relief, or seeking unemployment. Again, even though they're all considered essential workers. I also wanted to touch on the cannabis industry. So there's been this surge in the number of farms in Southern Oregon. Sort of part of the reason is because they're at the tip of what they call the Emerald Triangle, which is supposed to have great conditions for growing. We been hearing increasingly from workers who are sort of being lured to these kind of jobs. I think Jackson County actually last October declared a state of emergency over this very industry. And then the Oregon Liquor and Control Commission, they reported that most of the registered hemp grow sites in Jackson and Josephine County, sort of when they tested at above the limit for THC. So what we have been seeing is a lot of people with perhaps hemp licenses growing marijuana instead, and then selling it over states. And then because the sort of industry is an illegal industry, like the same sort of abuses that you see in the agricultural industry are sort of magnified. Right, so we see all this unscrupulous employers who are capitalizing on this vulnerable population. And then what we're hearing from workers, in addition to sort of the lack of pay and sort of bad living conditions, sort of, they're sleeping in the warehouses without adequate access to bedding or water or food. But a lot of the times there's armed guards. They're not allowed to leave the grow site. They're threatened with violence, both to themselves and to their families elsewhere, or immigration consequences. And then besides sort of various labor abuses, sort of in the environmental piece, the same illegal grows have been stealing water from rivers and creeks and aquifers during times of drought. And because they're like trying to cut costs again, like they rely on this like very like cheap, like they call them hoop houses. So it's not uncommon when these workplaces are raided to find you know, litter everywhere, and then like that they were using pesticides that they shouldn't be using, which again sort of also harms the workers and the environment. And then I still have a few minutes. I also wanted to touch on H2 workers. So under the Immigration and Nationality Act, foreign workers, sometimes called guest workers, they can be admitted to the United States to perform labor if the US workers cannot be found to perform the job. So there's like two kinds of H2 workers. So like H2A workers perform agricultural work. H2B workers perform non-agricultural work, although there's like some exceptions here and there. I'm focusing on H2B workers at Norwest Workers Justice Project. It's sort of it's part of this effort to address some of this rampant abuses that we've been hearing about going on in Southern Oregon. And it was supposed to be like the main thing I was working on, but again, we're sort of being swamped with hemp and marijuana cases coming from out of there. Like we just didn't really anticipate that being the case. But anyway, H2 workers, there's, sort of by definition, supposed to be performing temporary or seasonal work, and like not permanent. So like, again, the idea is that they're hiring these workers when the US workers can't be found. In Oregon, sort of every year, I think there's about 2,000 H2B workers who primarily are working in Medford and forestry. A lot of these workers come from Mexico, like they'll gather in Monterrey, and then like they'll take a bus, to like Alabama, and then they'll fly to Oregon, where like they'll work all over like the Western US. So they'll, do work in Medford, and they'll be bused to California, and then, like sort of taken everywhere. They're often invisible, like many like agricultural workers, and again, sort of workers in the hemp industry as well. Because they're working in very remote areas, they don't really have good connections to the community. And so even though some of them like return every year, because they don't have like good ties to the community, like they're still sort of vulnerable to exploitation from their employers, on which they're sort of completely dependent. So like their visas only allow them to work for the one employer. So the employer sort of, controls their economic livelihood. And again, because they're working in remote areas, they don't have much access to sort of community resources. And sort of what makes this also a problem for workers, like US workers in particular as well, is that like, if we allow sort of abuses of these guest workers, sort of drives the floor down for everybody, like driving wages down and things like this. Again, sort of, you see some of the same trends as in the case of the other workers I've been talking about, wage theft, dangerous conditions, retaliation, discrimination. So, for example, workers like will routinely work over like 60 hours a week, but they are earning like far less than what they should be making. So like when you work it out, they're earning something like just above $5 an hour. rather than the prevailing wage that they're supposed to be guaranteed. So like, because these workers are performing work in multiple regions, they're supposed to be paid whatever the sort of prevalent wage for that industry, for that kind of work is in that region. But that's often not the case. Like another thing we see related to sort of the pay issues, like they'll be paid on, 2 paychecks, right? To avoid paying overtime. So like, these 2 fictional employers sort of split the time that they're working to avoid paying them the extra time. They're supposed to be reimbursed for all the travel expenses that they incur in getting from their country of origin here, and that's often not the case. They often have their documents taken away as a way to keep them sort of captive, and then making them more unlikely to complain about wages and working conditions. It's very common to hear sort of like very bad accidents and then misreporting that to the work comp. So like, they'll claim it happened at home or something like this, just so the employer can wash their hands, and then they go back to their country, and like they have a really hard time sort of connecting with anybody to sort of see those through. What was the time here? Sorry, I'm just checking my clock. Actually, I'm just gonna end there, and then because I just want to leave time for questions. But before that, Virginia is going to introduce a couple of workers that are just going to sort of speak from first-hand experience. They speak Spanish, so somebody will be translating for them.
Yes.
So I will turn over to them.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rodrigo, very, very much for all that great information. I think that, many of the questions that are on the chat, we'll be answering them when we're done. I invited 2 of our Climate Justice Committee members because they want to share, their stories because they are, it's those voices that I talked about, that people that actually, have been doing this work, agricultural work, forest work, landscaping, and how they're affected. For me, it's easy to tell you tons of stories that, community has shared with us. But I think that, when you hear it from someone that is actually the folks, I can't relate to, saying, well, I've worked in the fields or I've worked in the forestry, like these 2 people that are willing to, share their stories. Anahi, vamos a estar traduciendo, puedes hacer tu historia, y José Antonio, también puedes contar tu historia en lo que empezaste, en lo que empezaron, y cómo, cómo fue que hicieron cambiaron de un puesto a otro por lo mismo, que por cómo han trabajado en el clima, que ha sido bien difícil para ustedes, ¿verdad? So, voy a pasárselo, si quiere, Anaí, gustas empezar tú, y Erika puede traducir para ti. Gracias, Erika. So, habla despacito, Anaí, y Erika te va traduciendo lo que vas diciendo, ¿ok?
Está bien.
Gracias. Ok, Erika.
Cuando estés lista, Anahi.
Ok, bueno, mi nombre es Anahi Cervantes.
My name is Anahi Cervantes.
Y yo soy miembro del comité de United Oregon.
I am a Climate Justice Committee member with Unite Oregon.
A mí esta noche me toca compartir con todos ustedes mis experiencias trabajando en los campos.
Tonight, I'm going to be here sharing my experiences about working in the fields.
Ok, mi experiencia trabajando en los campos, ya tengo 6 años trabajando en los campos, y mi experiencia es trabajando en la uva.
I have been working in the fields for about 6 years. I started doing grapes in the orchards.
También trabajé en lo que es la calabaza
And then I also worked in the pumpkin.
Y antes de eso, yo trabajaba para Girl Scout. Yo era Girl Scouts instructora de Girl Scouts.
And then before that, I was a Girl Scouts instructor.
So, yo decidí trabajar en los campos
I decided to start working in the fields
para poder ver cuáles eran las condiciones que había en ellos.
so that I can see the conditions that our people were going through.
So, cuando yo le comenté a mi esposo que yo quería hacer eso y trabajar en los campos, me dijo, ¿estás bien de la cabeza?
When I expressed to my husband my idea about working in the fields and what my reasons were, he looked at me and he said, "Are you all right in your head?"
So, yo decidí hacer ese trabajo porque yo representaba programa migrante.
I decided to do that because I was representing the immigrant program.
So, yo dije, yo tengo que entrar a los campos a trabajar para ver cuáles son las condiciones de todos los trabajadores.
So I figure in order for me to actually be aware of what the conditions are, I have to be working and doing the actual job.
Okay, so yo empecé en la uva,
So
trabajando.
when I started in the grapes,
Y mi experiencia, lo primero que vi es que a las personas no se les dan descanso.
the first thing I noticed was the workers never get breaks.
Solamente se les da el puro lonche o el almuerzo.
They only give like 30 minutes of breakfast or
No sé.
lunch.
No sé por qué lo hacen. So ahí
I don't
trabajaba
know why. But everyone has to work all day without breaks.
para lonche y después otra vez hasta que salimos de a la casa, a nuestros hogares.
The only time off or rest that you get, it's when you're taking your lunch. And then other than that, you have to work the rest of the hours straight without a break.
En algunos lugares nos dicen que tenemos que llevar nuestra propia agua.
And some places, they even ask you to bring your own water. They don't even provide you with water.
En algunas ocasiones, si se nos proporciona el agua, lo ponen en como un termo anaranjado y el agua no está fresca, está tibia o caliente.
Some other times when they have this big orange jugs of water, the water temperature, it's not even cold. It's warm water that we're drinking.
En una ocasión, yo vi que uno de los encargados o mayordomos tomó agua de la llave.
There was a time when I noticed that one of the foremans were actually drinking water out of the faucet.
Tuve que hacer apuntes.
I had to make my notes.
En el verano ya tenemos como 3 años o 4 años aquí en el valle que hemos tenido mucha mala contaminación acerca de los incendios.
During the summer, because during the last 3 or 4 summers, we have been having so much contamination with water because of the fires and everything related to it, smoke and everything else.
So no nos proporcionan máscaras.
So nobody's providing masks.
Yo las he comprado por mi propio dinero antes de que Virginia me diera muchas máscaras para regalar.
Right before Virginia started providing us with masks so that we can protect ourselves, I myself was having to buy them out of pocket so that I could protect myself.
So ahora que Virginia ya me ha estado dando máscaras, yo los comparto con muchas personas. Y
now, things that Virginia has been providing with some masks, we've been sharing them at work with other workers as well.
Y reparto algunas personas que trabajan en otro lugar en los ranchos, yo les doy esas máscaras para que compartan con sus compañeros.
Even some other people that work in different crews and other orchards, I try to share them with them so that they can be protected.
Hay unos mayordomos que lo que yo sé ahorita es que cuando están las temperaturas muy, muy altas, que estamos como a 105 a 110 grados.
Some of the foremen, as far as I know, when the temperatures rise to the 105, 110 degrees.
Lo que yo tengo entendido, no sé si estoy equivocada, que mencionaron esto el año pasado, que se les tiene que, después de 2 horas, se les puede dar un pequeño descanso de 5 minutos para que puedan tomar agua y poder respirar un poquito de aire.
For my understanding, as of last year, they're supposed to be providing with a break every 2 hours when the temperatures rise the high numbers.
Y yo vi que en algunos ranchos no les daban ese descanso, ese tiempo para que fueran lo que sea a tomar agua y se regresaran a trabajar.
And for what I'm aware, as far as I know, I've noticed that some of the foremen are not providing people with these breaks.
Yo estaba encargada de un grupo de personas y
I was in charge of a group of people,
yo cada 2 horas
and every 2 hours, I was suggesting people to take breaks.
yo les daba aparte de su break. Si yo veía que estaba por ejemplo, si tomamos un break ahorita, después de 2 horas, de 15 minutos, y si la temperatura subió, que está muy alta, después de 1 hora, yo les decía, tomen agua, vengan, tomen agua, pónganse en la sombra y quédense unos 5 o 7 minutos para que vuelvan otra, porque yo los veía rojos de su cara.
When I was in charge of this cruise, and I would notice that people's faces were getting red, or they were getting sweaty and too hot, I would ask my people to go ahead and take a 10-minute break, get some shade, and take a deep breath or something.
Sí, yo siempre los cuidaba y estaba al pendiente de ellos y yo andaba con ellos.
Ya nomás nos queda un minuto, Anahi.
También otra cosa es los baños. Hay muchos
Another thing is the bathrooms. There's a lot of places that they
sucios.
the bathrooms are in really bad condition. They're very dirty.
Y yo pienso que pues hay que poner un poquito más cuidado en eso, ¿verdad?
It would be good to have a little more care on that.
Y yo pienso que eso fue todo.
I think that's all I have for now.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
Gracias, Anahi, por compartir lo que has pasado. ¿Podrías poner tu en mute?
Sí.
Ahora vamos a presentar a José Antonio que cuente sus experiencias trabajando y haciendo cuando empezaste en el bosque y luego la agricultura y luego landscaping. So I'm asking José Antonio to share his story about, when he started in the forestry to working in the agriculture and then doing landscaping and some other jobs here and there. And he's going to be sharing his perspective about what he's had to endure working out in the fields or in the forestry or in the landscaping. Si gustas, quita tu mute, José Antonio. Y Erika, ¿quieres seguir haciendo translating? ¿O quieres que lo haga yo?
Está bien, Virginia.
¿Que lo haces tú?
Sí.
Oh, ok, muchas gracias, Erika. Ok, José
Claro.
Antonio, preséntate. Gracias.
Sí. Buenas tardes, mi nombre es José Antonio, soy miembro del Comité de Justicia Climática.
Good
Mi pronombre
afternoon, my
es
name
él.
is Jose Antonio. I am a member of the Climate Justice Committee as well, and my pronouns are he and his.
Pues, mi experiencia de cuando yo llegué aquí, que empecé a trabajar en landscaping, pues eran 10 horas y no nos daban ningún descanso. Estuviera la calor como estuviera, ni agua nos daban.
My experience when I first started working here in landscaping, there was times where I had to work 10 hours straight with no breaks, regardless of the high temperatures and the heat. There was no breaks or water provided at all in 10 hours straight of work.
Nada más nos daban el descanso para agarrar el puro lonche y ya de ahí no descansábamos. Eran 5 horas corridas y luego otras 5 horas corridas hasta que salíamos y así
It
era
was
todo el
5
tiempo
hours in
ahí.
between of work and then your lunch break, and then you had to work another 5 hours without any rests, any breaks, or any water provided at all.
Ahí, en esa compañía siempre está ese problema y lo de los baños, nunca tienen baños, es rara la vez que tienen baños.
Very rarely we were provided with bathrooms as well. We didn't have bathrooms majority of the times when we were working.
Después de ahí me salí y me fui a trabajar a la uva.
After that, when I left that job, I started working in the grape orchards as well.
Y pues igual como estaba diciendo la compañera Anahi, ahí en
And then my experience was the same as Anahi was saying.
Hay veces que se lastima uno, por no ayudarte te despiden.
A lot of the times, or there was times where I've noticed that people were getting injured, and instead of them providing with medical treatment or offering you to go get medical treatment, they will just fire you so that they don't have to pay for your medical expenses.
Y pues hay supervisores que son muy estrictos con los trabajadores.
The foremen are very strict with the workers. ¿En qué sentido son estrictos?
Tratan muy mal a la gente.
They don't treat people very well. They treat people badly.
He escuchado en rancho nos daban descansos más seguidos o nos paraban de cuando hacía mucha calor, y hay en otros ranchos que no te dejan, así esté haciendo como esté la calor, te traen trabajando así.
There are some places where the foreman would ask their workers to stop because of the heat and the weather conditions to take a break or anything. But these mean foremen, they would just have everybody work no matter what the heat or the temperature was.
Hay veces que uno se enferma, tienes que ir al doctor, ya no puedes ir a trabajar, les avisas y no te quieren, te pierdes tu trabajo si faltas un día, porque es por necesidad.
When you're sick and you go to the doctor and you even have doctor's notices or whatever, you call them and you tell them that you're not going to be able to work. They don't want to give you the day off, and they just lay you off sometimes. Other times you just have to go to work even if you're sick so you don't lose your job.
Y luego ya para conseguir otro trabajo se pone difícil.
Sometimes it's hard to get another job too. That's why you have to go to work even if you're sick.
Pues me parece que es todo lo que tengo que compartir.
¿Tuviste algún problema con tu salud y el calor? ¿Cómo afectó el calor tu salud?
Pues pues hay veces que siento uno que te deshidratas. Más que nada te deshidratas, hay veces que siento uno que se va a desmayar con la calor.
Sometimes
no hay agua.
Because of the heat and not water being provided, you feel the dehydration. Sometimes you're close to fainting in the middle of the fields and there is no water or breaks or shade at all. ¿Es todo lo que tienes?
Sí, sería todo.
I think that's all I have to share for today.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Muchas gracias, José Antonio, por compartir. Anahi, muchas gracias por compartir. Anahi and José Antonio, thank you for sharing your experiences. And Erika, thank you so much for translation. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over. I believe there's some questions in the chat that are going to be, I'm not sure who's going to be reading them. But,
Virginia, this is Kathy, and I'm going to go ahead ask the questions, and thank you very much
Thank you.
for sharing the stories. Those are very important for us to understand. The first
Thank you.
question I think is directed towards Rodrigo, as you were sharing, and I think it's the first one's from Marianne, asking about the people who are undocumented. Why are they excluded from government benefits during the pandemic? Can you unmute, Rodrigo?
So, yep, I just realized I was muted, sorry.
That's okay.
So undocumented people are excluded from all sorts of things like unemployment, unemployment benefits, SNAP, I think are the two main ones, even though, you know, they're paying local, state, and federal taxes, you know, every year. And then sort of a lot of time you have mixed status families, right? So perhaps the children are citizens, but not the parents. So then they will receive, you know, fewer benefits because of that too, because again, sort of undocumented people are left out. But as to the why, I mean, you know, I can just speculate. It's just, you know, animus, but
So on that same vein, Heather asked on the overtime pay, how's that going to be regulated?
So it'll be the same way that overtime sort of works for any other industry. So really what, at least, you know, in Oregon, like the overtime farm bill in Oregon, it's just really meant to sort of catch up farm workers like other industries who already, you know, paid for extra hours, but it's being phased in kind of slowly though. So, so it goes into effect again, January next year. And then it's 55 hours at that point. And then 2 years after that, it's gonna drop to 48. And then later again, it's gonna drop to 40 and catch up to the rest. But that would be like
I just want to know.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Heather.
I just want to know because a lot of people get their wages stolen from them, right? By unscrupulous people. How are they going to make it so that they actually get paid the money? It's what's being done to make sure they actually get paid the time that they're working. I understand that they're going to make it so that they can get paid, but who's saying that they're not just taking the money and running? The people that are paying them.
Right. So, I mean, depending on the worker's situation, I suppose there's a couple different avenues that they can pursue, but, you know, it's all going to be sort of context dependent. So like they can try to go through BOLI, the Bureau of Labor and Industries, you know, make a claim through there. They can also sort of pursue, you know, legal action if they can find a lawyer who wants to represent them. I guess a lot of, at least in the case, I mean, there's also cases where, you know, like they're owed wages because the sort of employer goes under, but there's like a wage fund, you know, to sort of deal with part of that. So sort of, you know, the same sort of avenues that basically anyone would try, you know, to get wages at the road. So, you know, going through the BOLI or again, sort of private litigation, civil court.
So my take on this is if I'm not a worker who's actually impacted, just a person in the community, this idea of paying them for overtime has started, but it's not really taken care of yet. There's a lot of work to be done. And I think we all need to be aware that this is an issue and follow it as best we can and be supportive of the efforts for people to get paid for the work that they're doing. That's my perspective. Joe Yetter is interested in who is more exploitive and abusive? Is it big ag or is it small producers? And he goes on to say he guesses it's probably highly variable, but that redress is easier against big ag. This is important to him because he's generally more suspicious of big ag. Would you support those ideas, or do you have a different perspective on that, Rodrigo?
Somebody just recently had sent me like I will make sure the link it's available to people, but like they can sort of put a list together of like, the main offenders. So then you can just sort of see the relative size of the people who are sort of constantly, being cited for labor abuse. I didn't look at it closely enough to like sort of figure out pattern, whether like most of them are big or not. But it for sure plays a role into whether you can do much for workers sometimes, right? Like if it's a tiny person and they went out of business, they might, like you're right, you might win or something, but like very little chance of recovering anything meaningful for the worker. Whereas sort of big players, you're perhaps more likely to, actually get meaningful recovery for your clients.
In that same vein, Alan asked, is there any way that we can help the exploited agricultural workers, especially those in the illegal cannabis grows? Is there anything we can do?
So recently, actually, don't remember the date exactly, but the legislature in Oregon sort of approved, I believe it's 6 million towards so sort of community-based organizations to help deal with sort of fallout on these workers. Right, sort of in addition to not being paid, a lot of the time, they're dealing with sort of the fallout of being abused or trafficked, or sort of, like lack of access to all sorts of support. So like some of that money is spent, to alleviating that, and that was, through people pushing on their legislatures. So that's a way. It's kind of ridiculous that the sort of federal law, I think it's kind of lagging behind in recognizing or like, keeping cannabis illegal, which sort of create this like weirdo gray spaces when you're trying to advocate for these workers. Sort of have to like, mind how you step so as to not step on the fence. So, I think pushing there would be good too. And then like in the case of, I don't know, over time, they're pretty sure there's like bill that has been proposed at the Fed level. So, you can always push your representatives. And then, like if people speak other languages or things like this, like there's huge need, like, like most of them are immigrant, and like sort of access to translators and stuff is difficult. And I'm sure that anybody who's like helping in this area would be happy to have, volunteers.
Okay, thank you for that. We just have a couple minutes left. Marianne wants to know what happened to the Cesar Chavez movement to unionize farm workers. We haven't heard about that for a while.
You're talking about like the United Farm Workers?
Mm-hmm.
That's only in California.
Okay, thank you, Virginia. Okay, let's go on to one from Liz. What's the dynamic between the H2B guest forest workers and extremist group Timber Unity?
I might need a little hand here because I'm not entirely sure who they are. So if somebody gives me a little detail, little background here, I can maybe feel it.
Timber Unity is an organization of loggers who are essentially opposed to any regulations or climate action in our forests. It's a astroturf organization actually funded by big timber, but it masquerades as a grassroots organization.
And then they've been speaking out against the guest worker program in some way or something?
I don't know if they've particularly spoken out against guest workers, but I wouldn't be surprised. They tend to be somewhat racist.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh,
So
sorry,
it's a
go ahead.
white, so it's a white-led organization?
right. And I was just, if their complaint is about jobs being threatened, but it's kind of a false claim, I would think. So I just didn't know if then that had a negative impact on the people who are actually doing the work. I just was wondering if there was any relationship there or.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. That is sort of a false claim because like employers that bring in guest workers, they're supposed to hire basically like any US worker that shows up during like the first 50% of the contract period. Like, you know, they show up, they just like have to give them a job. So, I mean, to say that they're stealing jobs or something, like, you know, when they have all these safeguards sort of built in so as to not harm, you know, US workers, right? It seems like, right, smokes and mirrors, like nonsense.
One of the things, Elizabeth, I'm so sorry, really quick, Elizabeth, what you just finished saying is that I think that this is just a way to continue exploiting, you know, these folks that don't have a voice, you know, our forest workers, our agricultural workers, because they have a need to work, to provide for their families.
So there's a few more comments that I encourage you to read in the chat. And I'm trying to make sure we cover all of them, but we are out of time. And I'd like to very quickly go to the final things for SOCAN, and I'll go through those quickly. But Alan wanted to make a comment before I do that.
Very quickly, one of the things we usually do in our programs like this is if we have elected officials in our audience, we always acknowledge them for their service. This evening, we have a candidate for Congressional District 2 in our audience, and we'd like to acknowledge Joe Yetta for joining us for this program on a very important issue. Thank you very much indeed, Joe, for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
So again, the links are socan.eco/action, and then under the individual action column, there's a heading Climate Justice 101. And Rodrigo is going to share the resources that he used. And so if people want to read more, those are not up yet, but I plan to get those up tomorrow so that you have that as a resource. But also as we hear of things that can be done, we'll add them to that page, but we'll also include them in our monthly broadcasts and different notices that we send out. So I'm hoping that you're going to take advantage of the base knowledge that you've gained to help us take action in this area. Going quickly to upcoming events, and all of these are on the SOCAN calendar, socan.eco/events. So if you miss details, you can go there to see them. SOCAN has a monthly broadcast and a reminder. And if you're not on that list, if you go to socan.eco and look on the right side under the rotating image, you can sign up. There's only 2 or sometimes 3 per month if you want to sign up for that. SOCAN is turning 10. It's our anniversary this year, 10 years from when we started bringing climate consciousness to Southern Oregon. And we've moved a little further on our celebration that will be September 17th at 5 p.m. Pam Marsh and Jeff Golden, longtime SOCAN associates and climate advocates, will be emceeing the event for us. So we really appreciate their support. And also Bill McKibben is going to be sending live greetings. If you don't know Bill McKibben, he helped found 350.org, which was the first global grassroots climate campaign. And so he will be joining us through the wonders of technology. So SOCAN has different programs, and under those programs, we have projects. Under the government program, the federal and state project meets on Monday, June 13th. It's a Zoom meeting, and the information is on the SOCAN calendar. Also under government is the county and city project, and the main group meets Thursday, June 23rd. And within that group are some action teams. The Medford action team will meet June 3rd, and that's a Zoom meeting. And the Jacksonville action team meets June 13th, and that's in person at the Jacksonville Public Library. The Natural Resources Program, the Forest and Fire Project, meets on Wednesday, June 15th, and that's a Zoom meeting. And then moving to the Community Engagement Program, we've had a group, SOCAN at Mountain Meadows, that has not been meeting during COVID. We are going to meet again on Tuesday, June 7th at the Mountain Meadows Clubhouse. You don't have to live in Mountain Meadows to join us. The focus does tend to be on Ashland activities. Our June meeting will be on Tuesday, June 28th, and we don't have final details for that one, so we'll have those. We'll get those to you in the monthly broadcast that should come out very soon. I'd like to call attention to our sponsors from the Master Climate Protector. That course will be offered again in February 2023. It's a 10-week course. And if you sign up now, it's just to get information as that the plans are developed. The education program applied for and received an Oregon Health Authority grant. And so we will be working with high school students, Latino ex-high school students, and that's in collaboration with UNITE and also Southern Oregon Land Conservancy. And we're very excited about that collaboration and that funding. Other projects we have under education and transportation are listed here. If you go to the website, you can get more details. These don't have any meetings scheduled immediately, but there's action that's going on. The same for some of the other projects under natural resources and community engagement. These are from other groups in the area that are doing things that we like to share, so you know other things that are happening. Rogue Valley Pollinator has an anthology art exhibit on Friday, June 3rd. And if you go to our Facebook page, SOCAN's Facebook page, there's a link to the details there. That group also has a native plant and pollinator botanical garden tour. Those are happening at Troon Vineyard. And again, if you go to Facebook for the Pollinator Project, you can get details. Southern Oregon Citizens Climate Lobby will not be meeting this month. Their conference in Washington, D.C. is June 11th through 13th, and a virtual conference is available. Dylan Hinson is the contact person. And if you miss any details, just send me an email and I'll give you that in the end. Sustainable Rogue Valley meets on June 12th, and Dorothy Swain is the contact person for that one. Ashland's transition to sustainability, one cool block at a time. Flavia Franco is doing these presentations, and they're through North Mountain Park. Registration's required. If you are interested and can't find the links on that, again, let me know and I can connect you. Southern Oregon Pachamama Alliance Community wants to announce that the Rogue Valley Water Solutions Summit will happen in September. The first event is going to be on September 14th. This will be an online event, and there will be several sessions. And ROCPAC is Rural Oregon Climate Political Action Committee. They're here to represent us in the legislature. If you have things that you think should be represented, Hogan Shiro is the person to contact, and they always appreciate our support. So I'd like to end with a big thanks to Rodrigo, Anahi, and Jose Antonio for sharing. We really appreciate your taking the time to provide us with the information that you have. Thanks to Virginia for making all this possible. This was Virginia's idea as we talked about opportunities to collaborate. And Erika, thank you very much for your translation. We do appreciate that. And thanks to all of you for joining us. It's really, really important in this arena to take the knowledge you've gained. Think how climate change is going to affect all of these issues. Well, is already affecting all these issues, making things worse. And we need to be out there speaking up for these people that are affected by it, and realize that, you know, we complain about the smoke, but we can go inside and turn on the AC. Most of us can, or some people can't. So very important to take action. And finally, an email was sent to you, and it has a follow-up survey. If you would respond to that, that'd be very helpful. If you asked a question and we didn't get it answered, you can include it in that survey. The survey is anonymous, but if you have a question you want answered, include your email and we'll get it answered and get back to you. SOCAN website again is socan.eco. If you have any questions, if there's anything I said that went by too quickly, send me an email, info@socan.eco, and we'll get responses to you. And then finally, if you have the ability to donate, SOCAN always appreciates your support as we carry on the work that we're trying to do. So with that, I will stop sharing.